Hi guys, it's Tracy here. And once again, I'm popping on as a surprise with a little Facebook Live in our Dating a Dad group. This month, I've decided to take the topic of discipline as something that we're going to dive deep and talk about a little bit extra on top of all the other things that we talk about in our group. And the first kind of subtopic of the idea of discipline for this week is about getting on the same page with your spouse, with your partner, and why that's so important, and more specifically, how to do it. Of course, it's so important because it's something that can really damage your marriage. It can be really a sticking point between yourself and your partner if you are not on the same page about how to raise these kids. I think that it's a very, very central thing in everybody's marriage relationship when there are kids involved, how you agree on how to raise them. For many of us, that's the very issue that was at the heart of our first divorce, the breakup of our first relationship, issues around raising the kids. So it's very important for us to take it seriously and to have a plan about how to get ourselves on the same page if we're not already. So there are different types of parenting styles, and there are different types of step-parent personalities and approach to the role. So if you know a little bit about these, it can be easier to see where you fit into the picture and where your partner fits and how you can blend those things together. One style of step-parenting is known as the matriarchal style. A matriarch is the female head of the family. So I know that I am firmly in the matriarchal camp because I come from a long line of matriarchs on both sides of my family. So it's very easy for me to adopt a leadership role in the household, in the family. And sometimes I can admit to myself that that gets out of place. It's too much for my husband. I override his authority over his own kids in a way that is unpleasant for him, and he lets me know. So when I stray too far out of his comfort zone, he teases me with the same joke that goes like this. Hello, newspaper. I'd like to place an ad, please. Encyclopedia for sale. Great condition, never used, wife knows everything. And we have a little laugh, and then I know that I've, gone a little bit too far. But you can't be a smarty pants all the time, right? And that would be my shortcoming for sure. I think he would agree with that. So in terms of parenting styles, of disciplining styles, there are 4 main styles that have been identified by psychologists. They are authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and uninvolved, or sometimes that's called neglectful. So the authoritative parent, which is not the same as authoritarian, I'm going to talk about that next. The authoritative parent sets limits early and often. So it's important to have those limits, but the authoritative parent is able to hold those limits from a place of love and not from a place of anger or a need for control. The authoritative parent understands that children need limits in order to experience frustration and learn how to overcome that. It's an important part of their development, of growing up. They need to learn tools for overcoming things like boredom or not getting what they want. And limits are important. And we expect the child to rail against those limits or to fight against them because that's the purpose of them. It's putting up a boundary for them to fight against a little bit and find a way out for themselves. In this style of parenting, the kids tend to feel secure and to respect the parent. Because this is an adult way of relating to and raising kids. The authoritarian parent also sets many limits, but these come more from a need for control on the part of the parent, a need to be obeyed, or a need to have their own needs met in some way, a need for peace and quiet, or a need for tidiness in the house, whatever it might be. So the authoritarian parent makes a lot of rules that don't seem to make sense, or they change without notice. And sometimes these rules come from an unconscious replaying of how we were raised ourselves, with rules that we didn't understand. And unconsciously, we get the idea that that's what parents do. They make rules that may or may not make sense, but because I'm the boss, because I'm the mom or the dad, because I said so, would be the authoritarian approach. The authoritarian parent is not able to evaluate whether those rules actually suit the present situation. They're just rules. So they don't necessarily consider the effect that these rules are having on the kids' development. They just think that rules are good for kids and rules are good for me because I'm the parent, and that's the starting place. The permissive parent sometimes gets called a Disney dad, but for sure there are Disney moms too. Of course there are. This type of permissive parent is not comfortable with holding limits at all, either from a place of love or from a place of control. They just don't like limits. They don't like discipline, and so they don't do it. This is a big problem where there's a partial custody situation, especially the less often you see the kids, the less you want to spend your time disciplining them or fighting with them. And the other parent, usually the step parent, can see these big holes, these lapses in appropriate parenting that they want to fill. So it would be very hard for a permissive parent to make a harmonious household with an authoritarian parent, for instance, who's just making rules that don't make any sense, but who really needs to have kids that follow the rules. This would be if you know that you tend towards the authoritarian side and your partner is more of a permissive parent. This is a recipe for disaster. You guys need to block out some time and sit down and talk about your values, talk about your parenting styles. Okay, the last time when I spoke on Monday, we talked about values and how it's so important to work out with your spouse, with the other parent, what is important to you in life. What do you want these kids to take from their time with you? What kind of adults do you want them to grow up to be? And which types of things what are the limits that are going to be set in your house? What are things that are really important to you? Maybe physical violence is a big issue for you. Maybe it's swearing. Maybe it's stealing. Maybe it's not finishing your plate at dinner time. You need to work out those things so that you can have a consistent approach. And we also talked about what if some bad behavior in the house is being driven by a good value that you appreciate, like loyalty. And this is one that comes up over and over again. Kids are loyal to both of their parents, and sometimes that makes a lot of trouble in your household when the child is being loyal to the absent parent, the non-custodial parent, whatever that might be. So it's important to be mindful of those things and to consider when children are displaying a value that you approve of, but in a way that's not working for whatever reason in your house. So if you are an authoritative or an authoritarian parent and your partner is more permissive, this is where something like disengaging is going to come in really, really handy. And not disengaging as a kind of spectacular hissy fit, but remembering to pull back and say, these are not my kids. This is what they call the nacho kids theory. They are nacho kids. They are your partner's kids. And you have to remember that your partner has to have always the final authority in parenting decisions. that is something that really can't be negotiable in a blended family. The final parenting style is the uninvolved parent. Sometimes that's also known as a neglectful parent. But this is one who would actively encourage their partner to take over their parenting duties, their disciplining duties. And this creates a big problem, especially early on in the first couple of years of a new blended family relationship, where the child is not yet ready to accept that. The child is not ready to accept being disciplined by another parent. It takes time. We need to build relationships before we try to assert our authority in that way. And Dr. James Bray, who is the author of this book called Step Families, says it takes 2 years for a new blended family to even start to gel, really. So we need to be patient. It takes a long time to build a relationship where you can work on limits, and especially without so much support from the biological parent. If they are really uncomfortable in that role, then it's going to take a long time until you can expect the child to respond well to that. So in general, it's best to let the biological parent take care of discipline issues and in choosing and setting the limits. And your role can be to enforce those limits. So it can be clear when you're enforcing limits that these are his or her rules, your partner's rules. And this adds to a child's sense of security because you are bringing them into the environment even when they're not present as the source of the child's security. That this is being done, this limit has to do with what that parent feels is right to provide security for this child. Like I said, don't forget to be patient. It takes 2 to 7 years for a blended family to really settle in. So you're in this for the rest of your life. This is a long, long game. Take your time and get it right. If you've already gotten into some kind of trouble over discipline issues, either with the kids or with your spouse, don't worry, you have a long time to pivot and try another approach. Okay, I'll be back on Friday with more. Thanks for watching.